Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics. I'm your host, Chris Egger, and tonight I'm joined by a panel of experts in the regulated cannabis industry here in California to talk about a very specific issue that is the application process at the municipal level, which is a big part of the state's policy making decisions through AUMA, which was that while the state licensing would cover the operations and the business transactions of the cannabis industry, that every local community would have a time, place, and manner land use policy contribution and getting approved in the local market. So one of the things we've been talking about on Pop Politics for the past almost year has been the taxation issue, but the second issue is the local access component. And so tonight we're going to dig into that topic, and I'm going to say from my left, at the very end here, we have John Armstrong of the Armstrong Law Group. Next to him, we have Dana Cisneros, who is of Cannabis Corporate Law and the principal there. And then finally, we have Reina McClendon, who is a social equity license applicant in the city of Long Beach for a retail dispensary license. And I believe it's Sticky Ooh-Wee. Is that all right? Sticky Ooh-Wee will be the name of the business when it opens in the near future here. So I want to thank all three of you for being here tonight. And I would ask the audience to please welcome them with some applause. And I'm going to start here, and I'm going to go to you first, Dana, since you have some real fresh perspective to share. But just really quickly, each one of you in general, can you give me, the audience, give me, because I'm the one who I guess invited y'all, but some background on who you are, what you do, and just some general, experience in the area of the licensing process on the local level.
Yes, so I'm Dana Cisneros. I am the principal at the Cannabis Corporate Law Firm. I've been practicing law for about 15 years, and I've always practiced business and real estate law and handled a variety of corporate functions for my clients, as well as litigation in those fields. About, 2016, 6 years ago, one of my clients came to me and asked me just to watch their back in a corporate transaction because they were going to invest in a cannabis company. And then the lawyer didn't do what they were supposed to for that cannabis company. And then someone had to save the day, and that was me. And so that was my first experience, actually, was being thrown directly into a local license and application process, because in 2016, we didn't have Prop 64 yet. It had been approved by the voters, but it did not take effect until January 1st of 2018. Since that time, my practice has grown, and I represent exclusively cannabis operators and investors. We still focus on business and real estate law, two highly relevant subject areas in this space. And I named my firm, Cannabis Corporate Law Firm, to send a message, which was that we should be really refining and looking toward sophistication in the cannabis industry with respect to our corporate practices. I had no idea the chads that would show up in this industry. And so now my firm's name, or fictitious business name, is Cannabis Corporate Law Firm, and it is what it is. I kind of have to giggle about it now. We've handled dozens, I would say, of local applications. I've done panels and spoken about the competitive and merit-based application process. Most recently, as in about an hour ago, I just got finished up with an appeal in the city of La Habra for a delivery license. There, we scored a 99.6%, and still the Planning Commission voted against approving our project. And we just successfully appealed that to the city council. So the city council overturned that ruling.
Bravo.
Is on its way. And we can sort of get into that. I don't want to
No,
talk
that's
too
okay,
much,
and we will get into it,
Yeah, we
Dana.
can get into that later. But importantly, we have handled a lot of state applications. Like I said, most recently, I had this appeal. Before that, we were successful in Corona. My guys ranked number 6. I just handled another one in National City. We got number 2.
Wow.
So it's it's a very stressful and time-consuming process, but every single city is different, and I'm excited to talk about
All
this.
right, thank you. And by the way, I appreciate you being here, and we will definitely be talking tonight about the difference between politics and policy, right? And that's, I think, to a degree what we're, starting to hear a little bit about La Habra. This is scratching of the surface on the politics there, right?
Yeah.
Now, John, if you would do the same for us, please.
Sure. I'm a business trial lawyer. I've been practicing law for about a little over 25 years. About 2010, I got approached by some of our what I'll call regular clients, and they're like, "Hey, California's kind of legalized medicinal cannabis, and would you represent us on trying to comply, with the existing California laws?" And I was kind of like, well, yeah, but you have to realize that this is completely illegal under federal law. And so even if you're operating legally under state law, the feds can come in and bust you at any time. And they're like, yeah, we know that. And as we got into it, I said, well, just out of curiosity, why did you pick us or me to help you with this? And they're like, well, it was a lot of money, and we first went to the big national law firms, and they said they couldn't touch this. So we know you're a good lawyer, so would you, we figured, well, maybe you'd help us, and that kind of snowballed. So it kind of went from kind of word of mouth that, like I would kind of help these other business professionals that were kind of not somebody that were, we'll say like, in the black market per se, but wanted to be white market operators or gray market operators until we had licensing, and then just kind of stayed with that, which is probably about half of my practice is in the cannabis and hemp space, which is all the same plant, but it's just different aspects of that, which includes Delta 8, which I'm still called to consult on Delta 8 at a national level, even though California's largely try to throw Delta 8 into a more regulated environment like Delta 9. And so I've kind of done everything you can kind of imagine, from helping people get licenses to do mergers and acquisitions, to do leases, real estate deals, compliance, get state and local licenses, and also, as my cohort, Dana Cisneros does, had to do appeals, had to go like Jaden's Journey when they were going to get denied their application and they'd been in the county for a long time, and one of the first, medical dispensaries, their license was at issue, and we're able to successfully get that overturned for them. And so, I'd say.
And which county was that, John?
What's that?
Which county was that? Because that's.
I'm trying to remember. It's one of the ones in Northern California.
Okay.
Like, it's in an unincorporated area. I'm trying to remember like the city or like designation.
It's okay. I didn't mean to call it up to you, but I was just curious. And for me personally, I've heard these stories time and time again, right? Yeah. Which is the never-ending bureaucracy and hurdles to get to. So, to have you two very experienced attorneys, time, place, and manner is the big part, right, of the discussion, but there's also favoritism, nepotism, and so on. So I want to give Reina here a moment to introduce herself, right? And if you would do that for the audience.
Hi, my name is Reina McClendon. I'm an equity applicant. We're going through this process with City Council to try to get a dispensary license for about a little over 2 years now. They finally approved it as of, I believe it's May 27th, when they complete the ordinance. So now we're going through the whole process. We do have a building, like John was saying, our store is called Sticky Ooey. So we'll be having a building on Atherton and Clark. And right now we're just doing the build out process and going through step by step with the planning checks. So that's what's taking a long time to do right now, because they have so many regulations with it, and then once you get done with something, they add something else to it, and so it's just been a struggle trying to keep up with all the regulations they want us to do and all the compliance type of things that need to be done. So.
And what was your professional background before you got into this industry? Have you owned other businesses before, or was there a desire to be a business owner in the cannabis space now that the opportunity presented itself?
Well, my husband and I, we've been entrepreneurs for quite a while. We write. I used to write. We write children's books, illustrate children's books. So we have about 9 published now, called Oodleville.
What are they?
What was that?
What are they? Or what are they about?
Basically, with the children's books, it was we tried to do meaningful things. Like we did one with the water crisis, and it was based in Africa, where one of our characters helped out a village, basically make the water wells and go get water and so forth. But we had the plush toys for it. They're actually on Amazon. So if you look
Very
at
cool.
Oodleville, you'll see Run for Water.
All right, so this is the reason I was asking that question. I want to lead into this for you guys to get a sense of it, is that you're applying for the social equity application versus the normal city layers of bureaucracy that go with opening any other business. And for folks who have opened businesses before, I've only heard that it's double, triple the amount of paperwork, legwork, legal work
Money.
that goes into, and money. Tell me a little bit about the start of the process towards the social equity, the 2-year period, I guess, as it's led up to now, where you're hopefully going to be open before the holiday season.
Well, with the startup of it, they basically want you to go through different programs. We did the Entrepreneurship Academy program, and it was just the ordinance they could never get into place. The cannabis oversight was constantly putting new ordinance in there, and nothing ever got approved. So finally, City Council instructed them exactly what they wanted, and that's what they ended up approving. But then again, they had to fix some of the ordinance. I think it was like a 2-week period. So they approved it, but with suggestions. So after that got done, now we're able to start moving forward with the RFP process. And like I said, we're just staying ahead of the game, getting our build out done, and getting everything else situated. So.
Right, well, good. Well, all right, so let's get into this now. If everyone's not familiar with the way that the California cannabis regulatory policy environment works, is that there's a state license that you need to secure, but there's a local permit or license. Maybe I'm using the right term, all right? Can you give us some
Depends
insight?
on the city.
Because one of the things that I was excited to have Dana talk about tonight is she told me there's maybe a good 20 to 30, is that right? That in the coming 2022 to 2023 will potentially be opening up the licensing application process again, and walk people through a little bit about what you're seeing in these cities that go.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a couple of things. I think one of the things that we're seeing is cities are impacted by the pandemic and the budgetary shortfalls that resulted from that, and they see cannabis as a way to fill some of the holes in their revenue streams. We had entire industries that were shut down, hospitality and things like that, for years, right? Anaheim is in a hell of a place right now. And so that's
for a lot of reasons, but that's a show unto itself.
That example, I'm from Anaheim, so that's the first thing that came to mind. And also Disneyland, right? And its impact and its closure and the impact on the surrounding hotels and the entire resort district over there. And so that's why Anaheim considered a cannabis tax back in 2020. I won't go into it too much, other than to say that for city councils, if anybody is lobbying their city council or talking to their city council, or if any city council members listening, the last thing you want to do with cannabis is have behind closed door meetings with only a select few individuals and make it look really obvious that you're hiding things to your constituents, because that isn't going to fly. And that's unfortunately what happened with Anaheim back in 2020. But but we are seeing, dozens of cities every day, a new one, Huntington Beach, all of the South Bay cities coming online for a taxation measure, because Prop 218 requires voter approval for a tax to be imposed. And so we're seeing more and more of those. The filing deadline for councils is coming, I believe it's 88 days prior to the election.
Right, I think it's the 12th of this month.
It is. It's
the
August
last
12th. Correct. August 12th is the last day. So just keep checking. And then, my firm or somebody is bound to publish a list of the cities with the ballot measures, sort of a final list. The big data companies, I'm sure, will come out with one as well. But nevertheless, we're seeing more and more open up. So part of it is they're seeing the revenue. Part of it is, they're a little bit concerned about the legacy market and people continuing to participate there, and sort of the city's inability to close down the legacy market. I don't use the term black market or white market. I actually co-authored a white paper about that when I was with CCIA regarding the use of the term the black market. It's not a term that I think we should be using anymore, but
I don't disagree.
And nevertheless,
Illicit market,
yeah,
unregulated market,
the
legacy market. There's different versions of it, but it's not a black market.
The promise of Prop 64 was supposed to be to move the legacy market into the regulated market. And so that California would benefit from taxation, consumers would benefit from clean and tested cannabis. And unfortunately, because of the inordinate amount of local control that was given to these local jurisdictions and municipalities, we've not seen that come to fruition. So a little bit is by force, right? I know that you've had Mr. Lewis of Catalyst on here
Elliot
before.
Lewis from Catalyst has been a guest on the show, and he's been working on filing initiatives in the South Bay cities.
Yes.
I think we'll see Hermosa Beach,
Hermosa,
Manhattan Beach,
Redondo, El Segundo.
but Redondo will be in 2023, I believe.
Well, they moved, they pushed it, and I think he consented or something.
So, and that
but nevertheless, it's forcing their hand. And this is actually something that I was going around telling cities back in 2019 was, listen, if you don't adopt ordinances on your own, giving yourself total and ultimate control, you're gonna see a citizen initiative come your way, and they're gonna strip you of all of the abilities that you would have to make changes to that and tweaks to that. And so every time you wanna make a change, you're gonna have to go back to your voters, and they didn't listen.
So here's the question I have for you,
now.
right? Is each one of these cities technically could have a different application process, right? The
And
one
we
that
do.
Reina is going through right now, the city of Long Beach, that's been affirmed and set in place for the social equity applicants to now apply through. So my question to you is are you seeing anything consistently in these applications before we start talking about the broken system of this diverse, landscape that allows for no cohesion in the process?
Yeah, we see a lot of consistency. So we see business plans, how much capital is required and to be proven. Varies by city, but most cities do require some sort of proof of capital at this point. So just any old body can't throw their hat in the ring without substantial financial backing and them thinking that they're going to get off the ground, which was really ridiculous because the truth is that everybody raises money. And so part of what they raise money on is that win, that permit, that license, that number 2 place, whatever the case may be. Most folks do need to raise money, but nevertheless, we see capital, business plans, security plans, safety plans of varying degrees, meaning about like life and safety and OSHA compliance and
I listened
fire
to Costa
safety.
Mesa City Council talk about a traffic control plan for the grand opening day. And did anyone have the traffic control plan?
Costa Mesa particularly, though, has a lot of drama. It has a very dramatic history involving parking. I had a client who called me up and was like, hey, I have this perfect property and I know the owner of the property and all this stuff. So I called Katrina Foley at the time and I said, what do you think about this? And she said, hell no. They had a problem with parking when we approved the local whatever Euro guy. We're not going to let a cannabis dispensary in there because of parking. And I'm like, well, what if we valet? She's like, hell no, we're not doing that. And so this is part of interacting with councils and understanding the city that you're applying in. And it's not cookie cutter. It's not the same. So one of the things, without being, going negative right away, but one of the things that I do see happen all the time is a lot of cities copy West Hollywood and Pasadena, who largely copied West Hollywood. They try to copy the procedure and the application and the points, but guess what they don't copy? The ordinance. And so it doesn't make any damn sense because when you go to look at it, you're like, hey, hold on, over here you said you wanted this, but you're giving me points for something else. Or you had all of these restrictions about the location, but in this particular city, you don't even require a property. So why are we talking about it? There's no points to be awarded. So I'm not going to use the real estate on this paper in order to discuss something we don't get points on. But there's that. But location, neighborhood compatibility, and a big one, and one that I think that the cannabis industry really should double down on, is community benefits and involvement. Speaking about the appeal that I just came from, first of all, it was unanimously overturned by the city council. One of the reasons is that particular client already has an existing business. He has a distribution center there already. And he and his entire family and staff have been out in that community. Meals on Wheels during the pandemic, donation of protective gear, all of those things, helping the seniors, helping the Elks Lodge and whatever other, local nonprofits. And it's not, they're not out there wearing their cannabis gear. They're just out there being people. And that helps break the stigma. And that's why, and they repeated that, like half of them, even Medrano, a police officer, a narcotics police officer, was complimenting how involved my client is in the community.
And I think that that's the corner we're looking to turn through the professionalism side. But it seems like they put all these Herculean obstacles in front of anybody trying to be compliant, which goes into that discussion we were just having right now. Where John, I'm gonna segue over to you here, buddy, because one of the things Dana's coming from an appeal, and there's politics there, right? Because when you have a policy, you can meet the policy requirements, but because you're in the cannabis industry, you're still kind of a victim to the politics and the stigmas that surround our industry. Talk a little bit about your experience real recently in that area, would you, my friend?
Well, there's a number of them. It kind of never ends. Like I said, I've got one case right now where it's a client that's doing an appeal for denial of a cultivation permit in the county of Riverside, and it was supposed to be an outdoor cultivation, whatever else. They have this like 100-acre parcel that's like kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it's surrounded by people, even though it's a completely agricultural zoned area, that have multi-million-dollar homes on their 20-acre parcel. And of course they have a lot of political strings, and so they were very vocal about, oh, this will change our neighborhood. And it's like he literally has like 3 neighbors, that literally are like acres away from where the business is going to be. And if you look at how the county of Riverside did the zoning, there's like, well, if not on this parcel, where in the world would you be able to put this? If you took this out of the equation, there's really no other place that you're going to be much closer to where actual people live and work.
So completely policy compliant, whatever policy they had established.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've been watching. It's Fuego Farms. I have 7 clients that applied, and not one of them has gone to hearing yet. And unincorporated Riverside is just how backwards their system is. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just curious if it was Fuego.
Yeah, it's Fuego. Yeah. It's just like, really?
The little house on the prairie is next door to their property, and a woman babysits children, and they play in the brook and go rolling down the hill. It's like, I'm not even joking. That's what she came out and said. Like, I was laughing during the hearing, like, oh my God, they're screwed.
Yeah, it's a whole mess of crazy. So like I said, it's a lot of times like, even if you're complying with everything else, they just be like, the city or county at any time, you can just go, yeah, just and there might be something else going on that your client has no idea, whatever else. And that's why it's really important, because these things are so local, is to kind of get, if you're going to make these applications, get that community involvement going, connect with the people so that there's political risk to the politicians that are voting on the application. So if it's the county, it's the Board of Supervisors. If it's the city, it's the city council. So that if your group is applying and that they know that you're very involved with the community and all these people are going to speak for you, that's probably as important as anything else, is like your HVAC plan, whether that meets compliance or whatever else. Because the politics just seeps in to this because it's localized. And that's what also makes it really hard, and that, that's what Dana was saying, kind of saying like, yeah, there are similarities, but you can't cookie cutter anything you do for one client for the next city or county, because you literally have to go and analyze each city and county's regs to figure out like, okay, here's your requirement list, here's what your ordinance says. Often these things are disconnected, and you're trying to figure out like, okay, they're not even sure what they're trying to do because this is new for them, and so everybody has to learn together. Like for example, like for Jaden's journey, it was Stanislaus County and Modesto, right? And for them, the appeal was this, is they're like, well, your client didn't give us an HVAC plan. And I pointed out to him and said, you didn't ask for one. And they're like, oh no, I'm pretty sure we did. And then I showed them their ordinance. I said, no, this is what you asked for. He said, describe your HVAC system and why it would be safe for your employees. I said, I could probably answer that in a sentence, but they actually had like 3.5 pages on their PowerPoint to answer that specific question. And they're like, well, but this other company gave us an HVAC plan. I said, well, that's nice, but if you don't ask for a plan and you want it by a certified guy, then you shouldn't be surprised when my client like answered the question that you actually asked him versus, not going the extra mile because they didn't think that was part of it. And especially it's hard because there are so many things that have like crazy level of specificity and other things that are general, and it gets expensive.
It sure does. And by the way, and I'm going to get to you two on this. I'm going to talk about HDL and the role that they have. They are not the only defining force in the ranking system in California, but they've definitely become a definitive fallback for many cities to work with, and it's interesting to talk about. But Reina, I got to ask you. So both John and Dana have talked about engaging in the community, being part of the community. I mean, I know as a fellow member of the Long Beach Collective Association, you've been to meetings there. I know you're obviously engaging the place that way, but did you find that you had engagement at that level, or did you apply and then that came to you, or how was that part of the process for you guys as you got into the city council, the city staff, and the community at large?
So you're basically asking if I'm participating in the community. Well, yes, I've participated even before I engaged in cannabis. I volunteered at the Meal for Wheels with the seniors over there off of 3rd Street in Long Beach. Also with the LBCA, I participate with the food drive that they do on every other Wednesday. We just started participating with that since we've joined them. Also, once we do get our dispensary up and going, we do plan to give back to the community with certain events. We have something called the Toys for Tots that we're going to be doing. It's TT, the turkeys, and for Thanksgiving. We plan to give back to the community because basically the community is who supports you. So, we want to support the community back.
Right, and did you get an engagement from the city leadership there when you had finally gotten to the point of qualifying as a social equity applicant? Do you feel like they've been engaging you to bring you into the fold, so to speak, with their perspective?
Not necessarily. We have to basically go search for, certain things that are happening. It is never going to just come to you. They just throw it out there. You'll get an email every now and then, oh, this is happening, or this is a new policy, this is the new requirements that you guys got to do. Like when we first started, we hired our architect and so forth to do the build out. After we submitted everything, like John was saying, they never mentioned anything about MEP plans. And after we submitted everything, then they're like, oh, wait, now you need the MEP plans, which is costly because we need the certificate, and so forth with all that. So they added that to it. And I think this is our 4th time going through the review process because of more and more add-ons that they keep adding. And we just have to keep complying with, what they say. So it takes a little longer than what we expected.
Cool. Well, and so let's get into that. Did you have points, by the way, in your application that you had to achieve?
We're still working on it.
Okay.
Everything is basically they just approved it, so we're actually in the process of everything.
So what they approved is that you're deserving of a retail license, and we're going to work with you till you get it.
Basically, they're still approving social equity applicants. We have to go through the RFP program. But as long as you have your merits, which, we've been, like I said, participating for about 2 years. So we went through the Entrepreneurship Academy, got the certificate from the mayor's office, which was supposed to guarantee us priority. But more and more applicants kept coming in, and so they finally stopped it as of May 10th, I believe it was.
Okay.
But yeah, we're still up there with the merits, and we're still working on everything to have everything complete by the time it all settles down and gets done. So we're hoping to have everything done by the end of August, and to have our license and so forth by then.
Oh, good.
Well, we'll be very fast.
Amen.
Well, like I said, we're trying to be ahead of everything. We're even doing the build out. We've, had the business plans, the SOPs. We have, everything that they're requiring of us. We have, a couple other things like the mayor's certificate, and I've attended city council meetings. I spoke at city council meetings, and so.
Good. So you've engaged in the civic process. You said hello to them, let them know that you want to be part of the business community.
They know who I am.
Oh, good. Right. That's exactly what they're talking about too.
Okay, yeah. So I've done emails with them about some of the issues that we have as social equity applicants. We went through a lot of barriers just to even get this far. So we've had a lot of stop and go situations and waiting process and so forth.
So, when we talk about the merit-based system and stuff like that, can John, Dana, can the two of you kind of talk a little bit about, if no one's familiar with the company HDL, early on, I believe they originated in the Bay Area, right? And they were working on the city of Oakland's ordinance.
But their history is in tax regulation. And that's, my understanding is that is why the cities went to them in the first place, it was someone familiar to them that was familiar with tax, that they could outsource tax collection, enforcement, business licensing, that type of stuff.
So they're talked about as a third party, kind of neutral party to set out and gauge the merits of the points in the applications, right? What's it like working with HCL? Is it a city by city difference, or how do they come to the table in terms of this part of the process? Because they often are the ones who rank the point scores for many of the application processes.
So sometimes they will administer the entire program. And then other times they will sit in and conduct the oral interviews or simply make recommendations on the ordinance, the application, and the procedure. It depends. It's all subject to contract negotiation between the city and HDL. But I will say this. The reason for hiring HDL in the first place is to sort of take the decision-making maybe biases or propensity to look like you're biased from the city council's dice, and take that out of their hands so that there's no accusation of improper influence on the decision makers. Instead, they give it to HDL, and it doesn't matter how funny or witty you think you are, they will not laugh at your jokes. And I can tell you that from experience. And so, in any event, they're fine. I don't mind them. But here's the deal, though. I have two comments, though, about it. So first is the purpose is that they put this decision-making authority in HDL in the hopes of having a very objective process. You get 100 points if you discuss your business plan thusly. The thing is, as John pointed out with his story about the HVAC plan, is that they have come to expect certain things from many of the big and top operators that can throw unlimited funds and have 6 locations that they're applying on and things like that, and a million plans, and it doesn't matter how many experts and consultants they hire. So they have come to expect that. And in one of the cases that I'm litigating, or an attorney in litigation for, I'm actually standing side by side with the city defending their process because my client received a permit in that case. But what we learned is that HDL, frankly, I don't know how objective they are. I don't know how objective any person can be when you're reading through numerous applications at the same time. We're humans. And so we're going to want, certain things, or say, oh, well, this is a great idea that you had an HVAC plan. Where the hell is yours, John? And that's exactly what happened, right?
We're going to elevate the standard.
And so what they've said is that basically a baseline is 80%. If you address the criteria, you're going to get 80% of the points, which is what most cities require to move on to the second phase and a more scrutinous evaluation of the merit-based criteria. And so they say you get 80% of the points if you basically hit every single one of the components that we've listed here in this rubric. If you go above and beyond, then we're looking at giving you more points beyond 80%. But of course, nobody can say how exactly that's determined. And then similarly, if you miss some of it, they deduct from 80%, and you have to have something completely missing to get 50%.
I can both agree that one of the reasons is like for Reina and for operators who are maybe entrepreneurs trying to get their first license, maybe they're from the community, this can be one of the areas that's most challenging, right?
Yeah, and I've actually, 2018, 2019, I wrote an article about it because it really hit me in the heartstrings, just what you're describing. And also clients like mine that I just had in La Habra. This is a local grown boy, right? Like he doesn't have a bunch of businesses and a huge financial backer, and he doesn't have 16 licenses to write home about. None of that. And so that's really, I think, where local politics and policy really matters, because they can say, okay, well, but we care more that we actually have a true local applicant on here, or someone who's already exhibited that they've come out to the community, right, and already shown that they're part and parcel of this community. These are the types of people we want. Only then can, the OGs and the real folks who broke their back to get this industry to the place that it is, only then can they really rise to compete with these huge MSOs or Cali, like large Cali operaters. That's the only way that they can compete.
Or even corporate operators, right? John, what's been your experience, right, in terms of HDL specific? I don't mean to put anyone on the spot with it, but I think it begs the question, is this system set up for people who already have licenses to get more of them, whereas for the local population, navigating that will never be the same? And I think another question I'm going to have on follow-up for you guys is, can best practices emerge from HDL's lesson book?
Well, yeah, I think there's three things I think that are important about HDL, and first off is they've kind of been this kind of de facto neutral party, and so they've kind of developed their own standards. And the problem is the standards that they developed on how they score are not necessarily tied to directly to any particular city or county that is ordinance. So, for example, like when I have a problem with how a client scores with HDL, the first thing I do is like pull up all the ordinance and what was published and what was being requested, and then compare that to the scoring of HDL. And often I find gaps. And so what's apparent to me over time is HDL has its own program. And I'm not saying it's a bad program, and what I was telling like the county of Stanislaus when they were saying like, I said, hey, I think that it's probably a good idea to ask for HVAC plan, especially for a business that has cannabis, like how are you evacuating fumes and whatever else, right? That's probably a good thing. But that's not what you asked.
The big term back in the day was odor abatement.
Yeah.
Say that three times fast and
still
furious.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Do you think, I think this, I feel like I wish they just told us what they wanted, as opposed to playing like hide the ball and who's going to write about this thing we didn't specifically ask for. Don't you wish they just said like, hey, you have to have these specific things in place for your HVAC?
And they're supposed
at planning,
to. Right.
Maybe, instead of at the
And-
merit-based place?
And they're supposed to. And so that's kind of the point. Because like what I kind of was talking to the county about, when we had this appeal, I said, look, if we're going to say we're going to sit down and play Monopoly, and then as we sit down to play the game, now we're playing Risk, it's like, well, these are different games. This doesn't make any sense. What am I supposed to do? I'm going to lose, and it's like, yeah, because you can't do that. All these regulations are supposed to be public. The direction they want are supposed to be clear. HDL should publish, like, this is what our criteria is. And if a city or county wants to adopt that and say, like, in addition to our other regulations, please make sure this is how you're going to get scored so people know in advance, then, you can prep for that. And that's part of the problem is the disconnect is, but the guys who have been through the ringer before successfully got licensed, they go, oh yeah, I know what HDL is looking for. And so that gives them a leg up, right? And so that's an issue.
HDL does that now. Well, not HDL, but I think the cities do that now.
Yeah.
I've not seen a process that does not include a rubric and a scoring criteria that breaks it down. I've not seen a process that comes out with just an ordinance that doesn't marry the points to it so that folks know what they're doing.
Do you think most of the applications moving forward are going to be based on these merit-driven? There's a pillow falling back.
Okay.
But that there's going to be this merit-driven point system rubrics that they're going to that almost all the ones in the future will be that.
It's a toss-up because at this point there's only umpteen ways to say a certain thing, and it's pretty much been said. And it's out there because of the Public Records Act. So right now, you can go and find that 99.6% application that I wrote, or the 102.5 I wrote in National City, or what have you, or Shrine/Stizzies, umpteen, applications up and down the state.
They're public record?
They're subject to the Public Records Act. So some cities do publish them online. Like if you go on Pasadena's website, you'll see all of them. But keep in mind, these are kind of older. Pasadena was early 2019, so you might want to look for something a little bit, closer in time. But again, there's only so many ways to say certain things, and I think that now folks know how to compete better, and finding those real sort of nuggets of what's going to distinguish you and really hone in on what does this city need, what can I give them, how can I solve whatever problems in that city. And it actually requires some thought and some interaction with the city. Like, what is the city's biggest problem right now? Like in La Habra, I didn't know it was obesity. So we volunteered to clean the dog walks and stuff throughout the city to make it more attractive to people to get out there and walk. So you have to actually engage with your city in order to understand what it is that they need. And as it turns out, the cannabis industry is really, really good at helping people.
Right.
It's kind of that thing that we've always done, and we're pretty resilient.
And that goes back to
Yeah.
the idea that being part of your community, but sometimes when they favor the corporate operator, the multi-location operator, you remove that. This is me personally, by the way, on my own high horse from that. And having been an applicant and also been someone who worked on a lot of applications in my public affairs career, not as a legal professional where
And
the
maybe
buck
sometimes
really
with
stops
me.
sometimes with the two of you. I get that. So Reina, let me ask you a question. So we've been talking about the idea of best practices in this industry, right? Best practice for taxation, right? How the industry can best deal with that. The states started to adjust their strategy there. I don't know if it met all of the goals and the necessary requirements, but you've been kind of adopting best practices for the past 2 years, right?
Yes.
And, can you speak to like, where were you kind of getting your information? How are you pursuing your local application in your community, which you've lived in Long Beach for a decade plus, right? So.
Yes, I've lived in Long Beach for about 12 years. Basically, when we started looking into cannabis, everything I was looking up online. I would do a lot of researching. I do a lot of resourcing. So that's why I found the equity program to get started with.
So you were already thinking about investing in cannabis, but the equity program applying to you gave you the first of whatever leg up that you were looking for.
Yes, it was more finances that we could invest into it. So once we found the equity program, they don't just like tell you go look at this or that. You have to really research into it and look into it. And then on top of that, you have to read every fine print they put in there. You have to engage, talking to people, for instance, the cannabis oversight. Then we had to engage, speak with the council members for them to get this approved.
Did they require the entrepreneur's class, or did they suggest and recommend that you take it and give you credit for having taken it?
They suggested that we take it, so we did volunteer for that. And then from the first day of it, they said that we'd be priority for the equity program. So I believe there's about 15 people that joined that.
Is that because you were in the entrepreneur program that you got the priority? Were those connected?
That's what they were saying, that when you take that, it would be priority. I know there was 156 equity applicants in Long Beach. They never quite told us how many are looking to be business owners and how many are just doing it for the employment. So
That's confusing in and of itself to me.
Interesting.
so basically,
So are they giving people training programs and things like that so they can build skill sets that appeal to employment in
well,
cannabis?
I believe in Long Beach, there's a regulation where 40% of the employees have to be equity applicants.
Really?
Yes. So that's one of the regulations they have there with that.
Of just the equity businesses or of all cannabis businesses in Long
All
Beach?
cannabis business. I believe it was
Interesting.
40% they have to have for equity. They also have to give equity applicants certain shelf space, and so forth with those regulations.
On Long Beach.
So they have that. I know that even when you do get a dispensary license, you got to keep the dispensary for at least 10 years. So they're putting more emphasis on basically if you're going into this, you're going to be long-term doing this, which, I plan to do anyways. And so with all of these things that they have in place, it's, they're trying to basically, I know a lot of equity programs, they say haven't worked out. For instance, in LA.
There's very
and so
few, yeah,
forth.
right, that have been successful and touted. I think Oakland is a city that opened a number, and even in Oakland, where they had financed the equity applicants with low interest loans, they were repossessing and going back
Yeah.
and leaning and foreclosing on them because of the fact that they were unable under the taxation model, which is a whole nother ballgame, right? Going back
you
to
have
the
to stay up on
taxation
that.
dialogue is not my goal. Well, the reason
No
I'm asking
taxes
this
tonight.
so, what we always try to get out of this program is what I call common ground for the industry audience, right? And so, Dana, John, we're talking about best practices, right? So we've outlined a few of them, right? You got to be engaged in your community, number one. But, the idea of where HDL has come into play and knowing what they're doing is supposedly that Switzerland of roles in the process, right? Where
Well,
they're
Kristen, that was
I
one
don't
of the-
think that.
That was one of the things my third point about HDL. What I'm a little concerned with is since HDL's kind of touted themselves as independent and kind of they've gotten a lot of power, and they've also invested in some other cannabis businesses. And so one of the things that to me it's like what it's not being disclosed as a requirement is to the extent HDL should be disclosing that it has a significant interest in one of the applicants before it that it's scoring, because there's no regulation regarding
Wow.
that. And the other concern I have is
Wait a
of
minute.
just a
Wouldn't they
monopoly.
be an agent of a county official?
Yeah, I mean you can go that route, but it's like they have interests in these other companies, and so yeah, I know where you're going with that, and it raises all kinds of interesting issues and red flags.
So wait, what cannabis
It's like a
companies do they have an interest in? I've never heard that.
All right, there's been a kind of a whispered rumor that they were very representative of interests in Northern California, and that those Northern California interests would transport themselves down here to Southern California based upon the fact that their first contribution was in Oakland. I always kind of left that up to the myth of the industry, but wow, John, that's an interesting point. I want you to expand on it for
Well,
us.
it kind of came up with the whole Jaden's Journey thing because the thought was the kind of the fix was in that HDL may have had an ulterior motive, and it was one of these things that's like that wasn't the card I wanted to play per se, because that's just one of these things where it's like how much of an interest, what get drilling down into it. But my concern is there isn't really a set full requirement when someone is a contractor for a government agency about how much they have to disclose or whether they have to step out. And then who is the competing company that says like, oh, well, we have a conflict, so we shouldn't be scoring because we may have a vested interest in some of these people who are applying. Who's the other company that's like HDL's competitor that can objectively do that? And to me, that's the real concern is that there really should be some type of a disclosure and then some type of disqualification procedure if a company has an interest in a cannabis company, that might taint their scoring, and there should be another company that they can, give this to score
Or process.
Or
There
process.
is. I don't remember their name because I've only seen it like once. But prior to that, there was Muni Services. There was Muni Services that was a competitor of HDL. They're always up at the Cannabis Control Conference in Sacramento.
The struggle I have, right, in all this is knowing that the deserts that are throughout the state, number one, and access to local markets, right, for cannabis compliant businesses that are getting licensed in cultivation and manufacturing and unable to nationalize their market, perspective, is that, how do we find a way that cities can say we did this the right way? We didn't do it our way, we did it the right way. And are there best practices that HDL has identified or Muni Services or that you two have seen and that you'd like to tell, city leadership, if you could have a moment, that these are things that they should be doing?
Okay, so personally, my belief is that the merit-based process most certainly favors those haves in the world, the folks with the money, the folks with the resources, and that can control real estate for an extended period of time. That's really the name of the game. You have to have enough money to hold and sit on real estate for at least a year with no income. And so I think that those merit-based processes have tended to favor a select few. We're seeing, in my opinion, an oligopoly emerge in California as well as nationwide. I don't like that. I don't like it because it leaves out small business. It leaves out really innovative entrepreneurs who have different business models because it's not what HDL or whomever is used to seeing. I do disagree that HDL is a, quote, neutral third party. I don't think that that's at all what they're presented as. They are an agent of the council, and they act at the council's influence and discretion and guidance. And I've actually had discussions about this with Matt Eaton. I've also shared a panel with Dave McPherson and spoke to him about the same issue. Those are two of the principals over at HDL. And really, they've really strongly told me a number of times that every city is different for them, and the council does tell them how to weight things and what to put in, particular emphasis on. So it's not, I don't think that they're supposed to be some kind of neutral third party and examining what the community wants. I think that they really are going by a rubric. And just quickly, for anybody out there listening, if you find yourself in a position where you have an ordinance without a rubric or without some kind of scoring criteria, under the Public Records Act, you can just simply request the administrative procedures that go with the ordinance, because those are written as well, and they explain to staff, HDL or whomever, how to evaluate the criteria under the ordinance. So that's something that would happen in Costa Mesa, for example, where Costa Mesa does not have something outlined, but rather that you have sort of broad categories of requirements. If you wanted to know it more in depth about how Costa Mesa is going to examine those, you would request that through the Public Records Act. And they're usually pretty quick to respond when they know that you're in an application situation. Going back to your question, though, about common ground, best practices, sort of what can emerge from HDL.
Or any of these processes.
Where I was going with that, though, is again, it's like, if you want, a Sally Port, for example, to be in every cannabis facility, then say that and require it. Stop beating around the bush and making someone pay $20,000 for me to write about why you need a Sally Port or why you have one, and instead just require the damn thing, and let's just move on. Let's even the playing field. Let's stop with the nonsense of jumping through hoops, and let's leave the locals to do what the locals should do, and that is consider zoning and the community and the people who elected them. That's what they do. That's what they're there for. The rest of it, security, whatever, where you're going to put your money, do you have enough money to get off the ground, all of those things, that's a state issue, and do you get there or not? I mean, everybody should have the chance to open a business. Last I checked, we still live in America with some rights. And so, we really should be, and two, I think also, we've really got to stick together and support each other, and especially the equity community. Do not forget where we came from. This is exactly where we came from. Most cities will have a requirement of a cannabis arrest or conviction or something like that. That means that person was already doing things with cannabis before all of this started, before it came lucrative and fancy, and the MedMens of the world tainted everybody's mind. I can't tell you how many clients came in, I want to be the next MedMen. Why? Why do you want to do that? And now they understand why I was saying why. 3 years ago, everyone thought I was trying to sell them short. I was like, no. Trust me, this is not the company you want to model yourself after. So I do really think that we should be advocating for a greater access, more equal playing field, and really involvement of the folks who are doing good work in the community, and again, uplifting the social equity community. I'm so glad to hear that Long Beach has this program. They aren't just throwing equity applicants, into the ringer. They're asking you to complete an entrepreneurial program. And I don't know how valuable it was, but at least they're trying to help, right? And give you some footing there. And then, similar with the 40%, that's great. That's something that was discussed with Santa Ana last week as well. And it's going to be a difficult one to enforce, but having equity eligible applicants register with the city gives the employer a place to now go find the folks who live in the city to meet the 40% requirement. Santa Ana is just going to leave it to our own.
I guess that's where I'm going with this. And John, we're talking about, as Dana's here giving us some great feedback, and I want to dig into you for a second here on this League of California Cities, right? Why aren't they giving more guidance to cities to make this a more thoroughly consistent process, and one that does have an approach for the artisan, for the legacy, cultural, workforce, and so on and so forth?
I think a lot of it has to do with, this is still relatively new for the cities and counties. This isn't something that they've historically done. What I would think from even the business side or even from a lawyer side would be easier for me is if the state set standards for the municipalities and said, here's what you need to require no more, no less, so that there's some more uniformity, in the process, and then let the local governments have some tweaks where they have some things, but the idea that the core things you have to do are there. And that's what we don't have right now. Another issue that I think is important is, when do you have vested rights in a license? And I've got that issue right now where, I had a company that was issued a license, and then the city unilaterally revoked it, and they said, well, we don't consider your license active until it's activated, and we didn't give you the green light to activate the license. So we're going to treat you like you're an application that we can terminate at any time for any reason. And after like millions of dollars are spent, doing a build out and everything else. And
I've heard a term called detrimental reliance.
Well,
is that something that comes into play with that discussion?
Well,
in the application?
often not, because a lot of times if you play like the game that the cities and counties are playing now, that if they can deem you an applicant and not a license holder, and then this is where it gets into these like really sophisticated legal definitions of active license is an actual license versus license issued. The state may have issued you your license, but your local permit still, then they view it as an application, and there's inconsistency there. They have this right to turn it off, and they usually say, as an applicant, you acknowledge that we can do this to you, so there is no detrimental reliance, because they're thinking ahead. They're thinking about these things. And so, but what
like
gets
the provisional license.
well, right, yeah,
Waivers, right, for pulling permits. If your permit's not, if your cannabis permit or application is not all the way approved, they'll make you waive and say, I get that this isn't a real license yet. I'm going to start building out anyways, and I'm not going to argue with you if you take it away from me before I have final approval.
Right, and this
is at my own risk.
Right, and that's what we talk about vested rights, because usually, like the appellate courts basically tell us that, hey, when someone has a license and that's been issued, you have vested rights, and the city can't arbitrarily and capriciously just take it away.
That requires hearings and things of that nature.
And what the cities and counties are doing is saying like, okay, well, for cannabis, you agree that, until we give you the final secret double tap approval, you're in this, you're assuming all the risk of this, and we know we're going to encourage you to spend it, and then you have deadlines. Like usually when you get your quote unquote provisional license, usually the period you have to get it up and running is about a year, right? And unless the city agrees to extend that deadline, or you can show good cause that there's some like COVID or something like that, so you couldn't do it, But if you can't, then they go, okay, well then it's expired and you're done, and then you're out. And you're like, I spent $1 million trying to do the bill in a year, I couldn't do it. Like I was like, a week late, and it's like, hey man, that was a process. And this is some of the inequity where you talk about how does this favor big businesses? It's like, well, because who else but somebody who's already successful in other things can take a hit like that? It's just, if a lot of people, it's like, hey, that's like, bankruptcy, done. Oh my God, you've killed me, and I can't believe I spent all this time, money, and energy trying
But
to
no
do these
bankruptcy,
things.
right?
Hey, no, so listen,
federal
everybody,
protection.
you have been really patient tonight, and I'm super appreciative of the time we've all spent here tonight. So I want to get down to it, right? For us as an industry, it's really important that we see more local communities opening up, okay? As Dana pointed out earlier, there are a number of local ballot initiatives that will be on the November 2022 ballot, many in the South Bay of Los Angeles, which is those communities, Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach, so on and so forth. The city of Huntington Beach will also hopefully have taxation on the ballot for the coming year, which will lead to them opening the door to regulatory overlays. And so it's important that we recognize that taxation was the key issue for us, right, on a forefront for a long time. And we've made some traction there. Local access is the next front, and it's going to be a lot more disjointed and a lot less unified. So the common ground here is listen to these two attorneys. You're having two seasoned attorneys up here who have been through the grind, know how to put these applications together and get them across the finish line. I want to thank you both for your time. And Reina, I'm so proud of you for going through this process and getting close to where you're
Very
actually
brave.
gonna realize. So what I do at the end of all these shows, you guys, is I say, is there anything I didn't ask you that you felt like you wanted to speak about, say something about, or finish out your commentary tonight on? I'll start with you, Reina, and we'll go down the line before we close out the night.
No, there's not really too much I could speak about. Like I said, I'm still going through the process. I'm glad that Long Beach has approved us to get the dispensaries already, the 8 dispensaries for social equity applicants, and allowing us to go through the process of it and have a chance to people in the community to actually get a dispensary in Long Beach. But yeah, maybe later on the show, once we do get the license, I'll come back and let you know how it went.
Right? Or maybe we'll be there at your grand opening.
Oh,
All
yes.
right. All right, cool. Dana, anything you'd like to talk about that we didn't get to?
Just that whoever's watching this live and to our audience here, tomorrow is the deadline with the state to comment on 2 state law regulatory provisions. One happens to relate to equity, its definition and fee waivers. And then the other one is the conversion from the stacked small licenses for cultivation to the unlimited licenses. I don't know what else to call it. It really just the conversion to the unlimited
So you
licenses.
mean everyone who had 3 1-acre,
Yeah,
you can now have a 5-acre license or 3-acre license or a
Both-
10-acre license?
Yeah, so both sets of regulations have been released, and the comments are due tomorrow. So if that's something that is important to you, please read and comment, because they need to hear from the industry or they're going to keep making bad policy. And then vote like your life depends on it, because our rights kind of do in the November election. So, in addition to looking at these cannabis issues, it's likely to bring folks out to vote. But it's also this election's likely to bring a lot of people out to vote. It wouldn't be pot politics if we didn't throw in a get out the vote
No, for real.
in there, right?
And I got to ask you, do me a favor, because everybody, Dana's really strong with good information on her website. So can you give everyone how to find you in the online world?
Yes. Although my website's a little dated at the moment because things keep changing so fast. But my website is cannabiscorplaw.com.
Okay, cool. And Instagram as well?
Cannabis corporate law.
Yeah, okay,
I
good.
think.
So,
Something
and
along
then
those
John,
lines.
anything that you'd like to add to our discussion tonight that you
Yeah,
didn't get to?
I think a real important issue, there's 2 big things. Obviously, the federal government's moving towards a policy of legalization. I think we'll see that in the next couple of years, which I think is pretty momentous in itself. I really do think that that's where that's headed. But I think in the short term, what's probably really important is at the state level and at the local level, we really need better cannabis tax reform in the sense of lower taxes. Because, right now, if you look at the taxes on flower, it is not reasonable based on the market value of what we'll call like journeyman quality flower. It's about $200 a pound on the taxes, and journeyman quality flower is selling about $200 a pound. And the thing is when Prop 64 happened and they had these regs where they thought about how they're going to tax it, you didn't take into account you're dealing with a commodity, which means you have prices that are going to constantly be in flux, because if there's an oversupply, the market prices are going to go down. If they're scarce, they go up. And so instead of having a percentage of what the sale is, it's like saying, oh, well, no, we charge so many dollars per unit, regardless of the market price, is just a silly tax policy. It's like, who does that? And also taxing the middlemen, like the wholesalers. Like, most wholesalers do not pay sales tax when they do transactions, but in the cannabis world, they do, both to the state and locally. And so, Dan and I have both been successful in proselytizing the importance of lowering taxes, at least at the local level, because that can be controlled. The state, we're going to have to either have some type of amendment or get 2/3 of the legislature to agree on something, which is really
So they've
great.
suspended it for now, but it's something that could return at any moment, right?
Exactly, and that's
But there's no tax in the middle, just cultivation on the state level.
The distributors have to pay taxes.
But not their own, though. The taxes they collect. There's no distro tax.
No, when you do a sale from distro to distro, there's a tax.
It's the cultivation tax following.
Yeah, there's a cultivation. There's multiple tax. I mean, anyway, but my point is that there's still taxes.
Right.
And the thing is, it's just that's a real problem. So for the
And
states.
tax policy, God, we're gonna drift into another program here. So I'm gonna say it. 1281 was Senator Bradford from Los Angeles. It was on the table. It was moved to the assembly. Then a rider bill was attached that made everyone think in the industry that the taxation issue had been solved, at least at the state level. But really what they did was they kicked the can down the road for 3 years. So they can still raise the excise tax when they can still reassert the cultivation tax if desired. Right?
1281 was separate, though.
I know it was, but it kind of died on the vine because of that move. I don't know if we'll still hear if it'll resurrect.
They could take it out of suspense. I think it died. I think it's just
Well, for
sitting
me,
there in
it was
appropriations.
the most appropriate approach to it. And this is just me and my little voice is saying,
5%.
Senator Bradford was a good guy. He
Bradford's
came out with a plan to reduce the excise tax to, I think, a reasonable 5%.
5%.
And eliminate all the other forms of taxation. And I think the rising tide would have floated our boats in that regards, which you would have seen a groundswell, I think.
And he had either the same or a different bill also that would have suspended excise tax for social equity operators, which would have been clutch as well.
Many of the operators in Oakland would have told you that it was taxes that broke their back. It wasn't the hard work. It wasn't the desire to succeed. It wasn't any of that. It was actually they were unable to financially justify their existence because of the fact of the high taxes that the city was collecting from them after having loaned them money. And that's for another program. So I just want to thank our panel tonight. I want to thank you, our audience and guests. And we'll look forward to having another one of these sessions soon. Until then, be safe, have fun. And this coming Saturday, I should mention, there will be a Bud Tenders Ball hosted by Belogi Blunts at the Garden Amphitheater here in Orange County to pay homage to the frontline workers and employees of the dispensary side of things. So, Reina, I hope you might come out. Maybe you'll meet some future employees, but come join us. And that's for Cannabis Capitol, along with Cannabis Management Group and a bunch of other folks. So thank you tonight. And from the Cannabis Capitol studios here at Infused Digital, signing off, and we'll see you soon.